Hi, hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and apparently we're already at the end of February, which is just like an insane thing to think about. So much has already happened. I feel like every day has just been delivering us these harrowing collective trials. But you know what? We made it. Here we are. But with that, you know what time it is. Yeah, that's right. It's time for the first bi-monthly reading wrap-up of 2025. Your favorite part of every bi-month. What am I saying? Just so you know, I normally go into these videos with like pretty substantial notes, but for a variety of reasons, this time I don't have a single note. Like I don't have anything written down. So today we're just gonna be riffing. This is gonna be a riff-filled video. Hi, interlude. I just want to acknowledge that if it looks to you like I both got hit in the face and also have a zit, you would be right about both of those things. It really did not look this bad in the mirror in yellow light, but apparently I'm fucking jaundiced. But you know what? I'm not refilming this video. I will not do it. Like, low-key, I died for this, and now apparently so is my pride. So just bear with me, act natural, nobody make any sudden movements. I'm not turning into a swamp monster, okay? I'm not turning into a fucking emoji. I'm just a girl. I'm just a girl that you have sworn to support through thick and thin. Through my one catastrophically awful zit that I get every 3 months like clockwork, and through walking into door frames because I have absolutely no concept of my physical form and how much space I take up in this world. Really, the whole earth is just one big obstacle course for people like me. I live my entire life like I'm just on a perpetual episode of Wipeout. But anyways, if this is your first time watching one of these videos on my channel, first of all, I usually have a little bit more decorum than I do right now. But second of all, I really try not to spoil anything in these videos other than what you can derive either from like the back of the book or maybe the first 50 to 100 pages, because I mean, if I liked a book, I want you to be able to have that completed experience. I don't really see the point in book recommendations that just like spoil the entire plot. It doesn't feel very conducive to success to me. But also because even with books that I thought were kind of average or I didn't like, I tried to do this really like wild, radical thing where I practice empathy for like other people who have different preferences. Yes, I will slander, I will complain, but also I do try to describe even books I don't like in a way where I feel like the right audience could find them. So yeah, that's why I don't do spoilers. Anyways, in terms of statistics, we're going through 10 books today. I got through 4 in January and then 6 in February. Not pictured, the 400,000 word fanfiction that is from my childhood that I'm rereading right now. Don't even ask in the comment section what the title is, okay? I'm not going to tell you. I'm not gonna like connect that to my face on the internet. But honestly, the great reading slump of 2024 is pretty much dead. I feel like I've kind of killed it. I kind of feel like we're so back. Like those are the golden words that you were scared you would never hear again on this channel. But anyways, that's the preamble. I'm gonna talk about these books. I'm gonna share my thoughts, feelings, and opinions, but I'm going to do so after a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Blueland. I try as much as I reasonably can in the modern world to live sustainably and intentionally. And especially when it comes to daily driver products that I'm going to be using all of the time, I like to find ones that are relatively clean and cruelty-free. And so I was really excited when blueland reached out to me because it gave me the opportunity to change over some of the things that I use every day. In my case, hand soap and dishwasher pods. I was able to change those out for some alternatives that are a little bit easier on the planet. The usual dishwasher pods that I used to use have a single-use plastic coating that's keeping all of the liquids and powders inside. And even though, yes, it dissolves when you run the dishwasher, that doesn't mean it disappears. Those tiny plastic molecules still exist. We still live in Newton's world, okay? Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And they end up in the environment, in our water supply, in our soil. I mean, also just in trace amounts on the dishes that we're eating off of. And Blueland, in comparison, doesn't use any single-use plastic at all in any component, from the tablets themselves to how they're packaged and the box that they're shipped in. And how it works is you just fill up the tub that you get when you first sign up with whatever your refill is. You pop one out when you have a load of dishes like this, and it is the same exact ease of use as any dishwasher pod, except without the creation of waste. I also have converted to using their hand soap, and they send you, when you sign up, this really cute forever dispenser, and you just fill it up with warm or hot water. You take a tablet, you drop it in, you let it dissolve. It kind of looks like one of those cool Alka-Seltzer tablets. You go about your day, you go do something else for a little while, and then you come back and voila, you have hand soap. Blueland's products in general are also pretty affordable. Once you have the starter kit for hand soaps, for example, you can get refill tablets for as low as like $2.25 each. And I feel like normally you're paying more of a premium to have access to sustainable products, but at least for me with these, I feel like they fit pretty well into my budget of what I was already paying before. If you think that Blueland sounds like a good fit for you, I strongly recommend checking them out, and you can do so either by scanning this QR code right here or through clicking the link below me in my description. And in either case, you can get 50% off your first order. Thank you so much to Blueland for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. let's get back to it. Okay, hello, welcome back to my chambers. I'm glad that you've returned safe from your long voyage with my ad. Anyways, the first book that I finished in 2025 is Jade City by Fonda Lee. I also read the second book in this trilogy, Jade War, this month, so I'm gonna talk about them together, even though this isn't perfectly chronological, sue me. And astute viewers might be wondering what led me, a chronic series unfinisher, to pick up the second book before my customary like 7 to 9 months had passed in between. And the answer to that would be that it's just really fucking good. I feel like I really needed to know what would happen. The Jade City series follows the Call family, and the Call family are like de facto partial rulers of this island called Kekon. And even though this island is really, really small, they're super important in the international landscape because they are the only source in the entire world of jade. And jade basically gives people superpowers. You can run really, really fast. You can like deflect things with your mind so that way bullets can't hit you. You can like channel all of the energy inside of you into this like psionic spear that you can stab people with, except you can like form a psionic shield as well against things like that. And if your shield, if your energy is stronger than the energy that comprises the spear, then that energy reverberates back and hits the original person. I don't know, it's all pretty cool, but that's what jade is. So obviously the entire world wants access to, you know, just the ability to give their soldiers superpowers to accomplish their like selfish imperialist ambitions. But Kekon has long had green-bone warriors who are really, really good with jade that have protected them from this level of foreign interference. And it is those green-bone warriors that serve as the de facto rulers for the islands. Like they do technically have a government, but almost everybody in the government is in the pocket of one of the big families. And we're finally getting to what this series is actually about. These books follow the Call family, who are the leaders of one of the 2 most prominent clans. And the book opens with the 4 siblings of the Call family just on the precipice of everything going absolutely insane inside of their lives. The oldest one has just succeeded his grandfather as the leader of the clan. The youngest is about to graduate a prodigy from one of the Greenbone academies. One of them is just now returning to the island, kind of with her tail between her legs after having like publicly left the family to follow a man to a different country. Drug trafficking is happening. The other primary clan has just started really grappling for power inside of the city. Everybody wants jade. There's a proxy war brewing. Just a ton of shit is happening and you're thrown into the middle of it and you have to see how everything turns out. That's what this book is. The series was pitched to me as being like The Godfather, but with fantasy elements and also in Hong Kong. And I do think that that's pretty accurate, but I feel like for me, what this really reminded me of was Succession on HBO. Just in terms of the way it's paced, the power struggles that are happening, all of the really complex character relationships, especially within the family. They're better people and they definitely love each other more than the Roys do in Succession. But the vast majority of these books are pretty slow paced. It's really just people talking and scheming and betraying each other and trying to put their machinations into play. Low-key, I feel like sometimes it has a little bit of a slice of life vibe. Things are still developing in the background, but you spend a lot of time just getting to know the characters. So it's definitely not like an action fantasy, but the fights and the action scenes are so cool, and they're only as good as they are because of all of that work that you're putting in emotionally to get to where the characters are. I love this series so far. I gave the first book 4 stars and the second book 4.5 stars. I think that if my attention span just ate some more spinach and did push-ups and went to the gym and grew the fuck up, then this might have been like a straight 5-star series. But there are moments in both books where I feel like I was a little bit bored, I was a little bit impatient and antsy, waiting for more things to happen. But whenever I wasn't actively reading these, whenever I had to bravely go and live my life instead, all that I could think about were these characters. Actually, that's still true because I still haven't read the 3rd book, but I want to savor it. I want to read it when I have a really free weekend and nothing else to do. It is like 700 pages long. It's so long, but I know it's going to hit. Next up, after Jade City, I picked up Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. And much like when I read Sometimes I Lie 2 or 3 years ago, after finishing this, I immediately forgot everything about it except for my anger. I feel like thrillers are my most suggestible genre. They're not really that big of a commitment. I'm pretty sure that I read this in an afternoon. So whenever I see gushing reviews for a book that has a pretty interesting premise, but it's by an author that I know that I kind of don't like, I can only take so much before I succumb to peer pressure and make a bad decision. Like, I've never claimed to be strong of will. And that's what happened to me with this one. I gave it 2 stars. I already kind of don't remember why. Rock, paper, scissors. My entire review is really just, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Girl, give us nothing. Just give me a second. Let me like refresh my memory. Oh my god, that's right. Dude, this book sucked. What's this about? You have a husband and wife who go on vacation because the wife wins like this kind of sus raffle at work, and the prize is that you get to stay in this like converted church Airbnb thing in the middle of nowhere, and also it's winter and it's like blizzarding as they approach the church, so their car just gets instantly fucking buried and they're trapped there in this creepy church. And the kicker and the draw of the book is that the husband, Adam, has face blindness, which is a real condition that like real people have, although I'm not convinced that this author did any research at all on what the condition is actually like. God, it's all coming back to me in waves. Like, without spoiling anything, one of the central conceits of this book just, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's just, it's so stupid. Okay, anyways, yeah, they go to this church. He has face blindness. She, and I quote, is sick of feeling unseen. And instead of figuring out their relationship, oh no, were we maybe brought to this creepy church in the middle of nowhere to accomplish nefarious ends? Could there be somebody out there in the snow? Why can't we leave? Are we trapped here? Are we going to die here? You know, just all of the questions that you ask yourself when you're in this situation that I would absolutely never be in, because I would have like ran point on figuring out what the fuck the deal was with this Airbnb. But whatever. She just gets an email from like hauntedcreepychurch@gmail.com and she's like, this sounds like an adventure. Do you want to go? And her husband asks no questions, and they do. I gave this book 2 stars. It got an extra star over 1 for just being pretty fast-paced and entertaining. Like, I wasn't allergic to continuing to read this book, you know, I didn't start breaking out in hives. But just like what I remember to be true, also with Sometimes I Lie, this book does 2 really annoying things. The first thing is that it constantly ends chapters with cliffhangers, pretending that the characters don't have information that they have, and then you start the next chapter and you realize that the character knew that thing all along was true, and that the cliffhanger from the last chapter was just like a fucking bait and didn't actually matter. Every chapter in this book felt like that. I feel like it's so disrespectful to the reader. It's like you're inventing suspense that doesn't actually exist in the world, and that will fizzle out immediately once you read the first 30 words of the next chapter. I don't know, it just really annoys me. And the other problem that this author has is that even with the parts of the story that are suspenseful and are interesting, that you're curious about as you're reading, she really just has to do the thing where it's like, oh boy, here's a twist. A second twist hiding behind the first twist. Wait, a third triple reach around secret twist hiding underneath a trapdoor. But then suddenly you get the 4th twist that puts everything into a new perspective, because did you ever really know anything that was going on this entire book? And it's just, you're doing too much. I'm sorry, maybe that makes me a hater. Alice Feeney, in my grand total of 2 books, so I'm basically an expert, she just always goes one too far, where at the end of the book, it just feels like a joke. It feels like a joke. And I just don't have respect for that. To me, a book is not good just because it's crazy and surprising. Like, it also just has to be good and well conceived, and this was neither of those things. And it's a shame, because I feel like the main twist could have been cool. It could have been pretty neat. So yeah, 2 stars. It was not for me. If you want something extremely fast-paced that is kind of crazy, but also low-key a little boring, somebody to say it. It's very domestic. Maybe you will like this. A lot of people like this author. I just Moving on, after that, I picked up How to End a Love Story. And this is about a woman named Helen, who is a really successful young adult author, and she's written a series that has just been like picked up for a TV adaptation, except she quickly finds out that the person who is hired on as basically the second in command for the screenwriting team is this guy named Grant. And it's not that Grant is like her enemy and she just really hates him specifically. That would be a surmountable problem to have in a contemporary romance. No, her beef with Grant is that he fucking killed her sister, which is crazy. I mean, obviously it wasn't like murder or he would be in jail. The truth of the situation is that when they were all teenagers, Helen's sister like threw herself into traffic, and Grant just happened to be the person that was driving down the road at the time, which is really unfortunate, like pretty traumatic, I would say, for everybody involved. And both of them, Helen and Grant, have dealt with pretty long-term repercussions of that for obvious reasons. But yeah, that's like their new meet cute. He's just one of the lead screenwriters adapting her young adult series, and they have to work together and get over the fact that he killed her sister. That's what the premise of this book is. It's crazy. I had extremely mixed feelings about this book. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. The biggest problem that this book has, other than what's obvious, and we'll get to that later, is that it doesn't know at any point, I don't think, what it wants to be. Because on one hand, you have this incredibly emotionally dense, traumatic core to the premise of the story, and you would think that that would be what the book is. Like, that's the main thing that the book is trying to deal with. But there are also parts of the story, like large swaths of it, that are just rom-com saccharine, where it's like, yeah, I know that you're still coming to terms with the fact that this man killed your sister and now is back in your life and you have to like relive all of this trauma, but let's go camping on a team retreat and let's get really blazed and go hiking and look at the trees. And oh no, you're taking a tumble and you fall down on top of him. And then there's another section of the book that is just smut. It's like 5 chapters of horny buildup and then actual smut. And like, I'm not a prude. That's fine. It's just this book, dude, this is happening in this book. It doesn't make any sense. If you're gonna write a book where the MMC killed the sister of the FMC, I feel like you gotta spend most of it dealing with that. I don't understand what you're trying to be. And I feel like in trying to be so many things at once, it ends up doing all of them kind of badly. And I just never really cared. There was never a moment where I felt particularly invested in their story together, in part because based on his actual actions on page in the book, Grant is pretty interesting as a character. I feel like the portrayal of his trauma and his anxiety and the way that that has kind of poisoned his relationships was interesting. Like it was pretty good, but he was doomed. I was never going to like him. He was doomed from the start, from the premise, because why the fuck is he taking this job? Helen doesn't know it's him. She has no oversight of this. She's not the person that hired him. She is jump scared when she walks into the writing room and sees his ass sitting in a chair in the 2IC spot. But he knew what job he was taking. He knew whose series he was adapting for TV. That person being the sister of the girl that he killed in a traumatic accident 10 years ago. Do anything else. Leave her alone. In no universe is that a good thing to do. You're taking what should be the peak of this woman's career, like one of the most exciting moments for her in her entire life as an author on this planet. And this man thinks to himself, he's like, yeah, the best thing I can do right now is just insert myself into this situation as a reminder of like all of the worst things that she has ever gone through in her life. No way that could go wrong for either of us. Even if you're selfish, even if you don't really care about her, at least have a little bit of self-preservation, dude. And if you haven't read this book, before you think to yourself, I don't know, Hollywood's pretty tough. Maybe he just like needed money to survive. Like maybe this was his big break. This man owns property in Los Angeles. He like has co-producer credits. He's one of the most powerful people inside of the writing room because he's hired in accordance with his experience. I'm pretty sure he could have gotten a different job. I mean, even if you can't, if that were me and I was like a decent, not evil person and things were really that desperate, I would fucking sell my house before I put somebody in that position. And it doesn't matter to me how nice he's characterized to be for the rest of this book. It doesn't matter to me that he's portrayed as this like anxious small bean who's like doing his best and really trying to like be a good person in his eyes and the eyes of others. You're not a good person. You suck for taking the job to begin with. And I never got over that, which was a big reason why I didn't like this book. But yeah, I mean, the writing's fine. I feel like there are some good emotional catharsis moments kind of towards the end. Yulin Kwong, the author, is the screenwriter for The People We Meet on Vacation movie. So this was comped a lot to Emily Henry. I don't really think it's very similar to Emily Henry, but that's like par for the course. Fucking everything is comped to Emily Henry nowadays, I feel like. But I don't know. Maybe if you're less bitter than me, you would enjoy this. But me personally, I couldn't get behind this couple. I couldn't get behind this story. After that, I picked up A Solemn for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is a fantasy novella. It's like really short. You could pretty easily read it in one sitting. And it takes place in this world where like existential, political, and environmental problems have just kind of been solved. There was a time long before the beginning of this book where all of the robots in the world became basically sentient at the same time and decided that they wanted to break away from humanity. And they all unionized and they were like, yeah, we want to go live in the woods and witness nature and watch the river flow and be present in our surroundings. And we also really don't think that humans should be in the woods with us. And somehow they pulled this off, I think without any violent war, at least no violent war that is mentioned. But basically the planet got split up into zones and humans live on one half of the planet and then the rest of the planet is untamed wilderness where also the robots live and scamper around. And this divide also had the additional benefit of like solving climate change and environmental catastrophes. But long ago when they left, the robots also made a promise to like come back in a while and check on humanity and see if they needed anything. But this has not happened. Some people don't even think robots exist anymore. Anyways, this book follows a tea monk named Dex, and their whole job is just to go from town to town and serve as this like therapist, priest, cafe hybrid thing where they set up their wagon outside of town and then people from the town come outside to get some tea and talk about their problems and maybe get some tea specifically that can help with their problems somehow. It's all very wholesome. And Dex does this for quite a while and they're really good at it, and by all means like they feel like they should be happy, but they just don't really feel fulfilled. So they end up making a spontaneous decision to go on this journey. And when they go on this journey, they make first contact with the robot who has finally been sent back out by the robot community who scampered into the woods to go and check in on humanity. This book to me is almost like the platonic ideal of cozy fantasy. It's short, it respects your time, it has really low physical stakes insofar as the world is fine. Like, you know, the world is going to be okay and like nothing insane is going to happen. Nobody's just gonna like randomly get murked, but it still has real emotional stakes and a real emotional journey for Dex, the main character. You read this book and you experience an afterglow of like 2 to 3 business days where it's like, wow, maybe the world isn't going to shit. Maybe everything could be okay. The book is pretty philosophical, but it's not like like particularly complex. Like these are ideas that you've probably seen before, you've probably read before in books. And the purpose of the book is not to like rock your whole world. It's just to package those ideas in a way that makes them like really hit and really emotionally resonate with you. And as a result, I do feel like some people might find a story like this to be a little bit trite, like a little bit too perfect, a little bit put up with a bow. If, for example, you really didn't like The Midnight Library, if you thought that that was a very lukewarm portrayal of recovering from mental illness, I don't think that you'll like this book. But for me personally, I liked The Midnight Library and I liked this. I gave this 4 stars. I just really like stories like that. I don't know, like I feel like if you can give me a book that makes me feel for my 2 to 3 business days that the world is less of a cold, dark place, I'm like 98% a jaded bitch, but the 2% of me that still has hope that's alive, it's important for me, I think, to feed that flame with books like this. So yeah, I liked it. I thought it was sweet. If you're looking for a pick-me-up, I think this could be a good one. Okay, next up, I read Strange the Dreamer, and I read this when I was still in New York earlier this month, and I was like so mad at myself that I didn't bring the sequel because the way that this book ends was just, it was insane. I think I would have like read this series in maybe 3 days if I had had it with me, but I didn't. And like true to form, now it's been like 2 or 3 weeks and I still haven't picked it up. So we'll see when that happens. But this book is also kind of hard to describe. I picked my no notes wrap up to read like 3 epic fantasy books. This book is about a boy whose name is Laszlo Strange, the titular Strange the Dreamer. He's called that because he often dreams of impossible and silly things, at least in the eyes of the people who raised him, because he's also an orphan, as all good YA protagonists are. And Laszlo grows up first in this monastery situation, and then after that he grows up for the rest of his life into adulthood in a library. And when he was very young at the monastery, he would talk a lot to this really old, kind of senile monk who would tell him stories about this long-lost city, kind of like a desert version of Atlantis, except honestly also way cooler. And Laszlo would listen to these stories about this incredible, fantastical, like super developed city, and he would pretend to be a warrior from the city. He would like play out in the fields or whatever, until one day when he's like 5 years old, the actual name of this city is magically erased from the minds of everybody who has ever talked about it and ever known about it, and it's replaced with Weep. The city is now called Weep, but Laszlo knows even then that something fishy is afoot. He knows that Weep is not the actual name of this city, even though he seems to be the only person who cares that the name was magically replaced in everybody's collective consciousness. And he spends his entire childhood after he's adopted out of this monastery and goes to live in a library, pouring through what few historical records still exist from Weep. And he learns everything that he could possibly need to know. He like teaches himself the language, which is a dead language. He like reconstructs it from trade records. Literally nobody in his life cares or understands this. They kind of just all think it was a lost city that fell to ruin somehow many, many years ago, until finally, out of nowhere, a delegation of soldiers from Weep arrives at Laszlo's kingdom. And they come in search of scientists and philosophers and just a bunch of highly educated people that can help them fix some kind of problem, some kind of super ambiguous problem that they refuse to explain in totality, but people still sign on to go because Weep used to be super rich and influential, and they're like in pursuit of glory. And after 15 years of hyperfixation, he's like I think 18 or 19 at this point, Laszlo is able to finesse his way onto this delegation and finally go to the city that he has spent like his entire life dreaming of. And the problem there ends up being pretty wild. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I had an absolutely wonderful time with it. The story of this book is just so imaginative. It's the kind of book that reminds you that not every young adult fantasy story in the modern day is just a loose collection of tropes strung together with twine. There are still so many books like this that create these extremely unique, palpable worlds where when you're reading it, the imagery is so good that you actually feel like you're just like walking around next to the characters. The mythology, the forgotten or forbidden histories that exist inside of this world, the things that some of the characters in this book have been through and have been able to overcome. The things that are going on in this book are pretty dark. I mean, they're dark in a young adult way where there's nothing really explicit on page, but the facts of the situation are metal. They're intense. It's pretty crazy, and I really appreciate young adult books that respect their readers like that. The only weaker part of this book for me personally, was there's a romance subplot that I feel like had a really interesting premise, but is kind of a little bit underdeveloped. Honestly, just because there's so much shit going on with the lore that there's really just not a lot of time for the romance to feel properly baked. But I still liked it. I still thought it was sweet. It just didn't have me kicking my feet, you know what I mean? Anyways, I know that all of this is like super vague. I hope that anything I'm saying in this entire video makes sense, but if you want something that is really unique and whimsical, but also has this really gritty core. If you like strong imagery, if you like complicated moral decisions, stories about low-key just generational trauma, I feel like you might really like this. I definitely did. I thought it was great. After that, I picked up The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I actually read part of this during my bookstore vlog that I just posted a couple of weeks ago, but I don't think that I talked about it at all in that video. I think it was low-key just a prop because I was reading it on the subway that day. This is a cozy witch found family orphan rom-com, and it follows a girl named Mika. And Mika is a witch who is living in basically modern London, but with witches. And I'm just gonna say off the bat that this is the kind of fantasy rom-com where they do give you some lore, they do give you some world building, but just accept what you get. Don't ask too many questions. Don't expect everything to make complete perfect sense all of the time. The fantasy elements exist solely for a love of the game, okay? It's just to make you happy, it's not to make you think. But the way that being a witch, at least in England, works is they're all a part of this secret society that meets up every, like, I think 2 months maybe? I don't know, I might just be making that shit up. But they meet up infrequently to like share spells and chat and just commiserate because there aren't that many witches in the world. And outside of those small sanctioned meeting times, you are not allowed to interact with any other witches. It's just perceived as too dangerous because when too many witches are together, then they attract more and more magic and weird shit can happen and like maybe they'll get burned at the stake. They're really trying to avoid that, so they can't hang out. They're not allowed. Also important to note in this universe is that all witches are orphans because there was like a curse that they accidentally cast upon themselves once upon a time, like 300 years ago. And so whenever a witch is born, their parents are doomed to die within a year basically, so they all end up being orphans. And Mika is basically all alone in this world because, I mean, just growing up in this society, you don't really learn how to build meaningful relationships with people. And she like posts witch influencer videos on TikTok. I mean, she's not actually using magic in the videos, even though she is actually a witch, but she just does it for fun, just to see, just to test the whims of fate. And she ends up getting this email from this just random guy in the English countryside who reaches out and he's like, hey, so I can tell that you're a witch, which no big deal, by the way, like I'm not gonna turn you into the witch police. Would you be willing to come to the English countryside with me to help tutor these 3 witch children? Because we are terrified that they will be discovered because children can't really control their magic. So yeah, Mika goes, she meets these 3 kids, she meets the guy who emailed her, who is this retired actor, and his husband, who is the gardener on the estate. She meets the housekeeper, and she meets the librarian, who in addition to being extremely hot is also a little bit mean, very smart, he's sarcastic, and he's also extremely protective over the children. He's like the only person inside of this little family unit that didn't want to bring in Mika because he doesn't trust an outsider to be able to keep the secret. So yeah, that's what's going on. I said this in my Goodreads review, but I feel like for me, this was the kind of book where it's so sweet, it's so aggressively wholesome and cozy that you look up from the book at the world around you and you feel kind of sick. You feel kind of disgusted just because like the juxtaposition is so severe. But I don't mean that as a critique. I actually really liked this. I gave it 4 stars. There was a time, especially in the first half, where I was like, is this a 5-star book? This is crazy. But no, I don't think so. But it is very, very sweet. This is, I think, the best I've seen found family done in a romance novel. I feel like normally that's like a series trope, that's a fantasy trope. It can be pretty difficult to build up this large, believable group of people who would all die for each other. But I believed it here. Just the banter and the way that everybody talked to each other inside of the group, how much everybody cared as well about the kids. The kids in this book are like kids often are in romance novels and just in books in general, where it's like, are these people talking like they're 7 years old? Probably not, but in general, I feel like for me personally, unrealistic children don't really bother me just because I don't spend a lot of time around children. I did like the pining part of this book more than I liked the resolution part of this book, but both were good. It was really sweet all the way through. It reminded me a little bit about what I liked about Half a Soul, just in terms of how whimsical the book feels. I think the writing style is fairly different, the banter is fairly different, even though I also liked the banter in this book, but the vibes, the energy is kind of the same. Honestly, I don't really have anything else to say. This is just, it's a warm hug. This is archetypically a warm hug romance, and you know if you need that better than I do. The next book I read after that was also a romance. This was The Neighbor Favor, and this is about a woman who is working as an editorial assistant in publishing, and she's a nonfiction, but she wants to eventually move to children's fiction, and also her job just sucks because her boss is like sadistic, and also her entire family is low-key breathing down her neck because her parents want her to be as successful as her 2 giga successful older sisters, and her sisters want her to like find a husband, they want her to find dates. So lots of meddling. She's exhausted. She's just trying to keep her head above water with it all. And completely on a whim one day, she ends up discovering that her favorite author has created a website and added a contact form. And her favorite author is like super niche. He wrote one book a few years ago for a press that then went bankrupt, so he was never seen again. But he opens up this website, and the main character, Lily, she emails him, and they start this epistolary relationship where they email back and forth, and over time, and over like a 70-page section in the book that is all emails, they fall in love. But right when it was looking like they would finally be able to see each other, they were gonna like call over FaceTime, this author completely ghosts her and leaves her out to dry. So that's unfortunate, but she moves on, she keeps on keeping on, and 6 or so months later, one of Lily's older sisters is getting married, and Lily makes a bet with them that if she's able to find her own date to the wedding, they'll stop trying to set her up with people that she ends up not liking. They agree, and then Lily is forced to face the consequences of her own actions when she realizes that this means that she actually has to find a date. But fortunately, just down the hall from her apartment is this extremely fine, relatively new neighbor who moved in a few months ago, and the two of them usually kind of like small talk. In the elevator, he seems single. I mean, I guess she doesn't really know for sure, but like he seems like he might be a prime candidate. But the twist, of course, is that this mysterious neighbor is also that same author who had just ghosted Lily like 6 months ago, and she has no idea that it's him because he writes under a pen name, and as soon as he realizes that she is the same Lily that he had been emailing, he's like, fuck my life, I can't go on this date with her. All of my old personal trauma issues that led me to ghosting her still exist, so he agrees to set her up with somebody else. That's what's going on. I liked this, but I didn't love it. I ended up giving it like a pretty solid 3-star. During the epistolary email section, I was kind of kicking my feet. There's something about it, man. I think it's the part of me that used to like really want a pen pal who was exactly my age and hot and interesting and would fall in love with me. Like there was a time in my life where that was really like the #1 thing that I yearned for. So even though a lot of the emails were like honestly pretty ridiculous, I was having a great time. I kind of loved it. But the rest of the book, I think it kind of lost me. I also feel like even the premise I gave you is a little bit of a lie, because yes, Nick agrees to help Lily find a date for this wedding. He agrees to help set her up with other people, but that never like really happens. It's really just them orbiting around each other and Lily not really understanding what's going on, and Nick being like, but I can't do it to her or to myself. I am unlovable. You know what I mean? I'm trying to like put to words what I didn't like about this book, but that's why it's so perfectly 3 stars, because it epitomizes average. Like I don't really have a lot of specific problems with it. It wasn't memorable. Like there was nothing about it that was especially good, other than I did like the way that they characterized Nick's background. There were some conversations that he has with some of the people in his life in like the last 15% of this book that were actually like pretty good. They were pretty hard hitting. His arc did have a pretty satisfying resolution, but other than that, there was truly nothing that stood out to me. But there was also nothing really bad about this book. The writing is fine, the conflict is fine, the miscommunication maybe would be annoying, but I do feel like you understand Nick's reasons for it, so it's fine. Lily is fine. She's kind of just a normal girl in a normal world. Really, the worst part about her is the fact that I thought that both of her sisters were like 10 times more interesting than she was, but I'm pretty sure that this author, she wrote other books in the series that follow her sisters, so I might come back and read those. I don't know, man. I don't really have any qualms. It was all right. I think that if you're a romance fan, you'll probably like the book, but it just wasn't anything special for me. Okay, next up, I finally finished Stiff by Mary Roach. I think I was reading this for like the entire 2-month period of this wrap up. I started it right at the beginning of the year, and I just finished it, I think 4 or 5 days ago. I gave this book 3 stars, and I just would like to compare it to The Neighbor Favor. This book was 3 stars because it was average. Like I had a fine time, but it was kind of forgettable. This is a 3-star of surrender. Honestly, if I'm being real with you, I didn't like this book. I didn't have a very good time, but I kind of think it's a skill issue. There's not really anything about this book that was bad in a craft sense. It's just really in the pit of my soul. I just didn't like it because I didn't like it. You know what I mean? But like, what is a star rating if not a reflection of the very essence of my soul? You know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna give this book 2 stars. That's right. Oh, we're getting crazy. My opinions are for me, okay? My ratings possess 0 objective merit, and that should be obvious by me giving this beloved nonfiction book by this beloved nonfiction author a paltry 2 stars. There we go. Let's start there. This is a pop science nonfiction book that is about cadavers and just all of the weird things that cadavers are used for, especially cadavers in science and in medical fields, and like what happens to your body when it's donated to science, or even when you don't formally donate your body to science and you're just in the 1800s and some French chud just runs up and steals your corpse from your grave, because that would also happen. It's about that. And I think it was around the part of this book where I started reading about how like you can use cadavers that float up to the top of the ocean to like figure out why a plane crashed. I was like, this is not a book for me, because that's objectively a kind of interesting fact. That's one of those niche professions that nobody would guess existed, but is actually kind of important, like reading a bunch of floating cadavers like tea leaves. But like all that I could feel when I was reading that part of the book was just sadness, a little bit of fear, and disgust. And I'm like at least 3% self-aware, okay? Maybe I'm part of the problem, but I just realized pretty swiftly after starting this book about what happens to your body after you die that it's none of my business. I don't really feel like I need to know. To be fair, it's also just been some time since I read a pop science book. I'm kind of like, that part of my brain is not really, the musculature is not there. And saying all of this about this book just feels kind of unjustifiably mean, because it really is fine. The writing is fine. It's well researched. I will say that I was told that Mary Roach was super funny, and to me, I didn't find this book to be like super funny. I feel like some of the jokes just didn't land, but I'm sure that that is at least partially just because I kind of didn't care overall. So like, I'm not gonna write off the author. Like, I think I probably would read something else by her in the future in a field that I'm more interested in and less afraid of. But like, I thought I would be interested in this. Normally, I like books about death. I like books about dying, but I guess when I think about actual books I like, maybe I mean that in a more philosophical sense, because one of my favorite books that I've read in the past few years in terms of nonfiction is definitely Being Mortal. That book is really good, but it's also good in part because it's kind of sad, and it also asks complicated moral questions about like how the fuck we're supposed to cope with like growing old and dying and being forgotten about as elders in society. Stiff does not really pose complicated moral questions. This is about to sound mean again, but I don't mean it in a mean way. It's really just like a BuzzFeed list of cool facts about cadavers that was expanded into being an entire book. Like it feels like a collection of fun facts. It's not actually like BuzzFeed. The book is better than that. I'm sounding mean again and I don't mean it. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't for me. I almost DNF'd it. This is about as close as I get in my real life to DNFing things. If I had a stronger will, if I was less of a completionist, I probably would have, but I made it through. It took like a month and a half, but I made it through. The last book that I read, I finished this literally last night. This is How to Say Babylon, and this is a memoir by a girl who grows up in a Rastafarian household in Jamaica, and the book is compared in marketing to Educated by Tara Westover, which is one of my favorite memoirs, in a way that I do think is fair, but I also think is misleading, because much like Educated, this is about a girl who grows up under the thumb of her extremely religious father, who has all of these rules about how she's supposed to maintain her purity and dress and wear her hair. Sometimes he doesn't let her and her siblings outside because he's afraid of the world as this like corrupting influence. He's physically and verbally abusive, and just all around, this family ends up dealing with a lot of trauma. And in both stories, both Tara and Sophia use their education as a way of making a better life for themselves, and as a way of also just processing like everything that happened to them. And they're both able to escape their respective home environments off of the back of being extremely academically gifted. And in that respect, yeah, it is kind of similar to Educated, and it's also, like Educated, extremely well written. The prose in this book is absolutely gorgeous. But the reason why I feel like that comparison is still a little bit misleading is because I feel like this story is also just really about growing up in extreme poverty in a post-colonial state. If you don't know what Rastafarianism is, it is a religious movement that sprung up kind of in opposition to a Western understanding of Christianity, and just in opposition to the West in general. It started in Jamaica in response to British colonial culture as this kind of like Black liberation movement, because interpreting the situation, I would say pretty correctly, colonized Black people in Jamaica were like, the West does not care about us. They don't give a fuck. They just want to break our backs for labor, and there's no actual room for us inside of their society. Like, they are a corrupting force. So that's kind of where it comes from. And like many religious movements, like many social movements, it has like a pretty nasty history inside of Jamaica. Sophia mentions in this book, for example, that there was an incident in the 1950s or the 1960s where a ton of people were like detained and tortured and killed, and evidence of this was just deleted from the world. It was deleted from newspapers. So to this day, nobody really knows what really happened. And none of this is to say that Rastafarianism does not have its problems. I mean, you see a lot of the problems that it has inside of this book, but it's like a really important piece of context, I think, to understand that this religion also comes from a place of resistance and from a place of like being oppressed and downtrodden. In the book, Sophia describes 3 primary sects and ways of being Rastafarian, but the actual truth of the matter is that for a lot of people, the religion is almost entirely decentralized, and the head of the household, the father, will just choose different parts of Rastafarian tradition that he will incorporate into the lives of his wife and his kids. In general, it's a very patriarchal system, but because it's also so decentralized, there's so much variation in how it's practiced practiced between families, and even how it's practiced like in Sophia's household throughout the duration of her life. And like, please forgive me if I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, because I'm trying to do this off of the cuff. And again, normally I take notes, but here we are. Anyways, that's what I mean when I say that I feel like this is best read through the lens of also being a poverty story, of also being a story about growing up in a post-colonial state, because you see the generational trauma, the institutional roadblocks that eventually lead her dad towards Rastafarianism before she's born. And then you see how being Rastafarian also just kind of means you're going to be treated like shit inside of society because you're part of a counterculture movement. And that fans the flames of being a part of the counterculture movement because you actually like are getting fucked over. And you can see this in Sophia's lifetime because depending on the hardships that her family was facing, some of which was her dad's fault, but a lot of which like wasn't. It was just kind of society. Her dad gets more and more strict. He becomes more and more of a zealot as she grows up because he's filled with more and more rage against society that doesn't really have anywhere else to go. And none of that justifies how he treats his wife, how he treats his kids, but it makes the relationship that Sophia and her siblings have with her father and with her mother way more complicated. And yeah, I don't know. I hope that any of that makes sense. I mean, I do think that if you liked Educated, you'd probably like this book and vice versa, but I don't think that they're like as similar as the synopsis for this might make them seem. With that said though, I love this book. I thought it was fantastic. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really love memoirs, and I especially love memoirs written by women who are like learning how to find their voice after traumatic events, or in this case, after like a lifetime of pretty traumatic events. And I especially love memoirs that feel like they're as complicated as life actually is. Sophia's relationships with her dad, with her mom, with her siblings, they're all extremely complicated because abuse makes you into complicated people. What can you forgive your father for doing to you? What can you forgive your mother for letting happen? How do you even begin to understand what your life might look like outside of the four walls that you've known the entire time, right? Like outside of the small bubble of your actual experiences. How can you dream big enough to get somewhere else, you know? I turned on a lamp. That's me admitting defeat for the day, but I'm almost done. Anyways, all of this is just so complicated because also another difference from Educated is that in Educated, those kids were like really sequestered, like they couldn't do anything. They were completely homeschooled. But in this story, you see a mental tug of war that's happening in the mind of her father where it's like he wants to keep them in because he doesn't want to let them get like corrupted by the outside world or whatever, but he also loves them enough to want them to get an education, to want them to be able to attain things in life that he was not able to see for himself. And they're able to go to school. I mean, Sophia is even able to go to this super bougie private high school that she gets a scholarship to, where she's literally surrounded by white people, both students and teachers, like anathema for what her father in their personal life allows her to do, but she gets to do that because to him, her education is more important than his control over her. But he still does and says really awful things. Like he still sucks, but he's complicated because life is complicated and people are complicated. And writing a memoir like this is like only the very beginning of picking up the pieces of what to do with your actual fucking life after all of this happens to you. It's just really good. The author is also by trade a poet. It's one of those books. So the entire book is beautifully written. I mean, I think sometimes to an extreme where because everything is so poetic all of the time, the moments that are especially poignant hit a little bit less hard because they don't stand out among the field. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense either, but that's like completely preferential. That's small potatoes for me. Like the point is the writing is really, really beautiful. Let me read you a quote. "After more than 19 years, my father still could not see me. To him, nothing I wrote would ever matter. Poetry was the voice I had forged because for so long I had been voiceless. I had written every word because I wanted him to hear me. Now I knew he never would. My chest heaved, puncturing. There, in the wound he had made, all the hushed grievances of the countryside plunged through me, and the cruel hurt of his words lingered long into my days, into my weeks, until it hardened like basalt. A black tumor I carried around with me, clenched like a fist." It's just really good. I cried when I was reading this. The ending part of the book is just, it's so emotional, it's so evocative. I mean, I also just cried reading the acknowledgements, like actual real tears reading the acknowledgements. It was that kind of book. So if you're a memoir girl, strongly recommend. If you like complicated family relationships, if you have respect for nuance and for how difficult it can be to hold two ideas in your head at the same time about a person, like this is your book. You'll have a really good time. I mean, actually you might have kind of a bad time because this book might make you kind of sad, but it'll be worth it. At the end of it, you'll be like, damn, that was a good story. And isn't that what it's all for at the end of the day? Anyways, that's everything. That's all that I read in the past couple of months. We're finally free. Thank you for enduring this video. If you had a good time, thanks. I appreciate you. Again, this was raw. This was an unmasked adventure today. If you did have fun though, you should like it. You should tell me how you're feeling, what you've been reading this month. I want to know. Checking in. Please take care of yourself during this trying time. Make sure that you're like drinking water, etc. At least some of your food should be green. I know that green food's not as good as brown food, but sometimes you have to eat green food in order to survive on this planet. Okay, that's really it. It's time to go. I don't have anything else to say. Bye!